one of the game changers for a lot of people is intentionally getting natural light exposure in the early part of the morning to help them to sleep better in the evening. A study, this was published in Innovations in Clinical Neuroscience. And the researchers found that the test participants who got early morning sun exposure had a dramatic decrease in their cortisol levels at night. All right, so what they were doing in the morning with sun exposure was helping to kind of optimize their cortisol rhythm, because your cortisol rhythm should go up first thing in the morning. Your cortisol is kind of jumping up, spiking to start the day. That's normal. Just get up and at 'em. Get after it, go out, handle your business. Through evolution, this would be go and gather, go and hunt, go and, community, connection, all the things. In the evening, it's going to gradually drop down. If cortisol is high in the evening, that's a problem, because in some ways, cortisol and melatonin it's kind of like the antithesis. It's kind of like if cortisol is pushing high, melatonin is going to have a tendency to get pushed down, right? So we do not want cortisol elevated in the evening. And so that was one aspect with the sun exposure. Here's another one. And more science is coming out right. This is like a hot topic right now. And this is sun exposure on your skin and the serotonergic system. So you producing serotonin from exposure to sunlight. All right. And so some of the details that we have now is that exposure to sunlight during the day is triggering the production of serotonin. We're still, or there's some questions on how it's all happening still, but let me give you the point that we do understand. It's one of those things that's helping to set that biological rhythm, because serotonin is a precursor to making melatonin. All right. And so it's like the opening act for your sleep in the evening. All right. So, and also that could be part of the reason it's pressing cortisol down in the evening. Serotonin is associated with being this kind of feel-good neurotransmitter, right? But it's so much more than that. It's a regulator of our sleep, potentially in our biological rhythm overall. But melatonin especially is a huge controller of our biological rhythms. So with that said, we get this serotonin production with early morning sun exposure. We're still figuring out the details on this, right? We know that the early morning sun exposure is going to push down our cortisol in the evening, right? It's another check in the box of like improving our sleep quality. And to top it all off, it's one of those things where the timing of that sun exposure is going to make a world of difference too. So I want to make that clear. Any sun exposure, if you're not getting any, is going to be helpful, all right? But in particular, it's within the first 2 to 3 hours, and I really preface 2 hours of the sun coming up, all right? And so and specifically it's the ambient sun exposure in the environment. You don't have to stare at the sun. We're not talking about that. But if you could get ambient light, sun exposure in your environment, preferably if you can get sunlight on your skin in the early part of the day. This is when the sun is less invasive for people that are concerned about, sun damage and all that, which is another huge conversation where we're more afraid of the sun, which has a small amount of implications, which they're serious. The massive implications is not getting any interaction with the sun, which is literally enabling life on the planet. All right. Like that is the fear, the thing that has helped us to have, we wouldn't have oxygen without the sun. We wouldn't have, plant matter. We wouldn't have life here, period. Like just come on. All right. So we have to be a little bit more aware and intentional about this, because again, we're very good at taking media and creating this fear mongering. Not to say you should, if you haven't been in the sun, to go out and spend 2 hours in the sun with, super pale skin. I'm not saying that. Or to use protection. I'm saying that our associations are really skewed to where now we're in such fear of the sun and things have been promoted to keep us indoors. And we're missing out on a critical biological input. Sunlight, we know this now, is influencing directly thousands of our genes and influencing epigenetic programs, right? So determining which genes are getting expressed just by sun exposure, and the offshoot from that, vitamin D being another big important component. So to put all this together, what we want to do to leverage this is, if at all possible, I know that people have different conditions, but during the time of year that you can, whenever you can, get outside and get some early morning sun exposure. If your skin is darker, if you're looking for like production of vitamin D and all that stuff, you need more time in the sun. But get up if you can get yourself just 10 minutes outside, and you can make it, you can stack it. Like you can go out, this can be your time you go out and have your cup of coffee, go out and have your do your journaling, read a little bit, have your breakfast outside. You could exercise outside, which is going to help to support that cortisol rhythm as well, right? And that's another thing. I'm just going to throw this in here really quickly. Appalachian State University, I mentioned this years ago when we talked about this. Appalachian State University did a study to find out what's the best time to exercise to improve your sleep quality. And they had test subjects to exercise at 7 a.m. for one phase, 1 p.m. for another phase, and 7 p.m. in the evening for another phase. They found that the morning exercisers who were working out at 7 a.m. had more efficient sleep cycles. They tended to sleep longer. They had, and this was another really interesting thing, a greater drop in their blood pressure in the evening, right? So again, that's correlated with that drop in that sympathetic fight or flight, right? That relaxation process, right? By exercising in the morning. Does this mean you can't exercise after work at 4 or 5? No, you could do that. Fine. But get some morning exercise in because it's going to help to improve your sleep quality. All right. So yeah, getting some natural sun exposure to start the day is one of the essential inputs that our genes expect from us to help to improve our sleep quality.
And you mentioned the right time of year for you, generally speaking too, because sometimes we are here in just outside of Santa Monica, here in Los Angeles. It's a little overcast, but that's still beneficial. Yeah. Do you want to say anything about that? Like in terms of helping people understand just the, even if you're on the East Coast, even if you're somewhere cloudy, it's still beneficial to be outside.
Yes. Yes. One of the studies that I was just talking about not too long ago, researchers actually were looking at, and this was looking at cadavers and looking at the seasonal implications of serotonin in their system, and finding that even in places that were more overcast, they still tended to have higher levels of serotonin or their analogs versus people who were not getting sun exposure at all, right? So getting sun exposed, so getting outside, even on an overcast day, the sun is still shining through. Many people know you can still get sunburned when it's overcast. Matter of fact, it might even improve the likelihood that you're getting sunburned because of just how the sun is dancing in association with those clouds. But also, if you're looking at, because this would get into the conversation of the different types, UVA, UVB, UVC. UVCs, like we've got this kind of shield around the earth in a sense in the ozone layer. So that's like galaxy level, like outside of the earth. So that's not really a concern. UVB, of all the rays that are reaching the surface of the earth, 95% of them are UVA. UVB is what triggers the production of vitamin D in our system. But so little of those rays are actually getting to Earth, all right? This is why being adamant about getting sun exposure at certain times of year, because that's even going to change, right? We've even got this section of the United States that it's going to change from the time of year when you're even getting vitamin D, producing UVB even reaching you, right? So there's this kind of belt around the country, right? And so if we're living in the northern latitudes, we're not going to be producing or getting the types of rays that can help us to produce vitamin D, So we got to be mindful of that. This could be a place for supplementation potentially, but the human body is very good at storing up some vitamin D. So just getting the sunlight that you can. Now this conversation, I didn't know he was going to get into this. With vitamin D, this is going to be a different time of day than that morning sun exposure. So it's just like, I got to get more sunlight. It's like another natural input that we might not be acclimated to. So this is why I'm saying anytime you can get some natural sunlight is going to be better than nothing, right? And your benefits are going to be different depending on the time of day.
So I want to use that as a jump off point to some of the mindset piece around it. That idea of like a morning protocol, morning routine has been talked about so much in the context of getting sunlight. Definitely not when your book first came out, right? That was like a game changer for a lot of people understanding it. And since then, more and more people have been highlighting it, talking about it. And yet still, I know that there are probably people listening to this podcast today. They're like, I know about this. I've heard about this before. And of course, there's no one size fits all, but I'd love you to think about maybe from the hundreds of thousands of people that reach out to you on a regular basis and are testing out these different recommendations that you give on your podcast all the time, Model Health Show, subscribe, link in the show notes. What do you think is just that, right? Just that particular protocol. What are some of the mindset traps or things that people fall into where even if they know it, they don't actually do it on a consistent basis? What do you think's going on there?
Oh man, there's a very simple principle here. People want, the reason that we would even entertain ideas like that is that we want better. We want to feel better. We want change. Maybe it's our body composition. We want to see some change happen there. Maybe it's our energy. We want to see some change happen there. Maybe it's our performance at work. Maybe it's our relationships. We want to see some change happen there. But here's the rub. People want change, but they don't want to change that much. They want a new result, but they don't want in their life right now, want to change that much in order to get it. And this is because humans, we're very comfortable with who we are. Now, you might not like who you are, where you are exactly, but we're very comfortable with it. Everything driving human psychology, the number one driving force of the human psyche is to stay congruent with the ideas and actions that we believe are the associated actions and beliefs and ideas of the person who we are right now. So again, the number one driving force of the human psyche is to stay congruent with the ideas that we hold about ourselves and the world around us, just to be more clear. All right, that's what's driving our reality, all right? Our perception of things.
This is who I am, so I got to act in this way to preserve who I am.
Exactly. And when you deter from that, all kinds of chaos is going to be taking place psychologically because you're deterring from what is comfortable, what is known. And so what tends to happen is if we're talking about creating a morning routine to improve your sleep quality or performance or whatever the case might be, and you start having too many ingredients, that's just too much change at one time for the vast majority of people. So again, we want change, but we don't want to change that much. And so there's this tenet that's been spoken about for thousands of years to know thyself, right? Know thyself. Are you the rip off the Band-Aid, just go all in type of person? Are you the person, the baby steps person? Are you the person who quit stuff really quickly? You know, like you got to look at your track record, look at your history and know who you are. None of these is better than the other because each and every one of these personality types has seen great success in the world. There have been examples of people who operate that way, who've created amazing things in the world. But if you don't know yourself and what you're good at and what your potential, you know, not so good at stuff is, I'm not going to say weaknesses, but if you're not aware of those things, your not so good stuff, or AKA your weaknesses, are going to keep on chiseling away at you. And so a couple of things. One is for the majority of people, just taking on 1 to 2 interventions at one time to get started. So a great example, my wife's personality type is to go all in, and then whenever she hits a snag, she quickly will stop doing said thing. All right. And because but here's the thing, life is going to happen. So if you're coming into this scenario and you're wanting this particular change and you're not aware that's like, you have this crazy idea that everything is going to work out perfectly. Like we'll start this new routine. It's going to be great. But then boom, an issue with, you know, the kids or the parents or a car or something.
Something always happens.
Always. So if you don't have that awareness that something's going to happen, not to expect it so you're just like broadcasting a problem, but just to be aware of when the thing shows up like, oh yeah, something, yeah, I was expecting you. I was expecting an obstacle along the way, or 2 or 3, right? So being aware that something is going to happen. And instead of like, again, she'll do all the things. So like, okay, I gotta do this, I gotta do the program, I gotta do that. There are other people who they spend so much time in preparation that they never even get started, or they rarely get started, right? So they always got to make sure everything's right. Got to get the perfect outfit, perfect shoes. I got to get the cooler for the bed. I got to get all this stuff. No, just go to bed. Like, just start with one thing. That just get off the device for 30 minutes, right? You don't need to buy something to do that. You don't need everything to be perfect, right? But that's kind of like that Barry Schwartz book from back in the day, the paradox of choice, right? We have so many things to do that we do nothing, right? So many choices that we have a hard time choosing anything. And so for the majority of people, again, you take just a couple of implements. So we've talked about a few today. So maybe you just give yourself, hey, I'm going to start with that 30-minute screen curfew, and I'm just going to do that. That's it. I don't have to do the temperature thing, and I don't have to have this talk with my significant other, and I don't have to. Just take some of the pressure off to be perfect, right? And just understand you're going to get some benefit just from implementing one thing. Get really good at that, then do the next thing, right? But again, 1 to 2 things, because people are just like, well, I don't want just one thing, so that's why I say 2.
So let's say you're doing 1 or 2 things and you feel like you've gotten a pretty good handle on it, right? How long before they might think about including the next thing? Obviously, every person's different, but just in your experience, right? Is a couple of weeks good enough before they start incorporating the next thing? What are your thoughts on that?
There's a lot of science and debate around habits, so much. And, how long does it take to create a habit? What it really boils down to is a neuroassociation. So your brain and your biology expecting certain things, specifically at certain times. I believe that you can leverage and shift your habits faster if you're putting them on this circadian system, the circadian timing system. And so it starts to anchor in where your body literally expects certain things to happen at certain times. So if you're doing that, so we'll just say the 30-minute screen curfew and, working out in the morning for just 5 minutes, 5-minute morning exercise outside and 30-minute screen curfew, right? So you're doing that, and you're doing this at relatively the same time for a couple of weeks. And it's just like, it's starting to become second nature. Like, it kind of feels, it's good. It's not a big deal. Then I would say you can add something else in, but you have to know yourself. All right. But for most people, and I can't stress this enough, if it's happening at the same time, right? If it's not, if it's still kind of sporadic, don't add in another piece. All right. So for me, because what tends to happen with habits is everybody experiences that kind of like new love phase, right? Where it's just like, oh, this is awesome. I'm like drinking water when I get up, doing my morning exercise. It's amazing. It's amazing. Why'd I wait so long? Everything's going good. But then after about a week, maybe a little bit longer, then the struggle phase starts to come into play. Maybe even before a week, where your brain is like, all right, this isn't you. We've been sleeping an extra 2 hours, because we've been up late. And you've been getting up and getting a bowl of Frosted Flakes like for 17 years. And now you want to get up and exercise? Who do you think you are? And so the struggle starts to happen where you got to kind of like make yourself do the thing rather than just like, I'm drawn to it, right? That struggle phase is where most people throw in the towel. And also we'll start to look for problems. Not only that the obstacle will happen, but we'll look for problems. We'll look for an excuse to not do the thing, right? But if you can be aware of the struggle phase, the discomfort coming up, and your brain is literally trying to change its association to your habits, to your life, and to who you are, who you see yourself being, if you could traverse through that just for a little bit longer, now you're going to get into more of the integration phase, right? To where it starts to become second nature, starts to become a part of you, starts to become a little bit more of your identity.
You might even look forward to it.
You might even look forward to it, because once it becomes a part of your identity, it's just what you do. Right? So for me, if I go too long without working out, I don't feel right.
What just give some examples. What do you feel in your body? Like, what do you notice? How does your mind shift when you go too long without working out? What's the first indicators that you see?
Oh man, there's some key words that come up for me. It depends on the level of gym etiquette out here, but you start to miss the pump. You start to miss that feeling of fullness and strength. Like you might even feel like a little bit less superhero vibe going on. But real talk, what would tend to happen is I would feel like something's missing, like there's something off in my life. Something is missing, and I can't quite put my finger on it unless I do a little bit of self-analysis. Now, this is difficult because this rarely happens, but it has happened.
Sure.
I've been in this field specifically for 20 years, working in this field. But prior to that, I was lifting weights, in college and, high school and sports and stuff like that. But so that's one thing, just the feeling that something is missing, something is off. And also sleep. My sleep quality is noticeably better when I work out. It's not that my sleep is bad, but I just sleep better. Like I sleep deeper. I fall asleep faster when I work out, right? And I can notice over time, like I feel like I'm not sleeping as much. Maybe again, I don't necessarily need to because I'm not recovering, but I don't like it. All right. I like this certain amount of sleep that just feels right for me, And it's because my body's acclimated to having this sleep with this input, right? So that's another thing. And this is a big one too. And this can happen, especially if you're sleep deprived, but my appetite is different, right? So if I'm not working out like I normally do, my cravings go up, surprisingly. All right. It's the craziest thing. All right. Because you would think if you're working out, your body's going to want you to get more resources in. But man, on the days that I don't work out is when I eat the most. All right.
And probably the cravings shift towards other types of foods.
Oh, man. Yeah.
You mentioned something earlier. You said, know thyself, right? What are some things you know about you, right? Broadening beyond sleep for a second, that they're just who you are. And so you've adjusted your general boundaries in the day, could be with routines, could be with work, could be with people, to create enough buffer so you can be who you are. So are there things that you've put in place in your life, systems, boundaries, etc., that allow you to be more of who you are and not let the world distract you from your mission and your goals and dreams in life? I know it's a broad question, but just anything come up for you on that?
Yeah. This was not manufactured, but this does come back to sleep because I value feeling good so much. It's such a high priority in my life. And I know what it's like to not feel good, to feel sleep deprived, to feel like, I'm exhausted or I'm not mentally as sharp as I normally am. I like feeling like myself, right? And so creating some structure and systems around that, like my youngest son, Braden, even there are so many cultural taboos in some ways, but also myths around sleep. Like this is one of those things, unless it's messed up, people don't really talk about it. And even when it's messed up, people still don't talk about it. But we're led to believe that when you have a baby, for example, that you're not going to sleep for the next 5 years. Like, forget about it. But we're also lacking communication and training and support from, like, we don't live in the same tribal construct that we evolved in. Even closer in your culture, like the grandparents are there, right? And oftentimes in the household, right? And so there's support, there's people working together. There are multiple people taking care of the baby, but there are also patterns. You got to understand, even the baby wants to sleep, but the baby wants their needs met, right? And so me coming into this, I'm aware. And so I'm creating these patterns. I know that, for example, we started to create a little bit of a gap from his last feeding, right? So instead of letting him get a little snack from mommy, maybe an hour before bed, just let him be a little hungry, all right? So he really goes to town on lay nipple when he finally gets a chance to eat, right? And so, but here's the thing, we can't just have the baby just sitting up here crying and everybody's agitated and upset, and he's upset and I'm upset and we're all upset. I'm going to spend some time. Let me keep him entertained, right? So this is great father baby time. Like we're hanging out. I know he's still like kind of looking over, where's that nipple, but I'll engage with him. We have some fun. I get him tired, right? So I'm actually having him play a little bit. And then he has a really big feeding right before bed, because those needs, like what is the baby waking up for? Changed, food, just trying to get things sorted out, being a new life here in this 24-hour solar day. The body's just trying to sort it out. Let's help that. Let's help the process. And by the way, none of this stuff, there is hardly even a tenet in science that cannot be challenged at some level, And so I'm thinking about even some of our scientific tenets, even physics, right? Laws of physics. Right now we're looking at the strong potential of like different dimensions existing, right? And so are the laws of physics still upheld the same way in this other dimension that might have just something a little bit different as far as their physics? You know what I mean? Like at some point, everything, we're just using our language and our awareness now to communicate. The problem is we act like we know everything and not staying open. And so in saying this, no baby is just going to follow lockstep with these things that I'm talking about. But what we can learn to do as a culture is stack conditions and to support each other. Because what's happening is we're becoming more and more separate as time has gone on. And so, we have a society, we have a social structure that's promoting more of that isolation, right? So even your social media, your online engagement with other people, is still distant. It's still, you're going into this device to experience human connection, which is, again, very abnormal. Not to say that it can't be amazing and fruitful and rewarding and wonderful, but when that's replacing real world human interaction and real world human support, where your family member can actually hold the baby, that's a problem. And so, again, we've gotten more and more distant from each other. We got more and more distance from our community, our neighbors. And so with my son, we had my mom-in-law, man, she really came through, even like making food and all the things. And she's from Kenya, like the culture, she just come through. There's all this food. We don't have to worry, that mental thing is off of our shoulders, right? And it's such a blessing. I'm so grateful for that, because it's something I wouldn't have thought of. But what I did know after working with people for, at that point, maybe 10 years, almost 10 years, is finding a neuroassociation for him. So every night we would play the same music. I put on the same like meditation music, right? And it got to the point where, of course, after putting him to bed for a while, a year, 2 years later, we just go in the room, put the music on, and he goes to sleep, right? Now the problem is today, I'm wondering if he's going to be like 17 out with his friends. He might hear this meditation music and just like, narcolepsy, just fall asleep on the spot. Like, what's up with Braden? But it's creating these neuroassociations, right? Putting him to bed at the same time, if at all possible, right? Just stacking conditions for him, and then it got to, once we started reading with him, in the book, we had the same routine every night. And he was sleeping through the night probably right around 8 weeks. Was getting like 7 hours of sleep, which is amazing, because we're so taught that that's not even possible. And again, that's not going to happen across the board for everybody. We have to open the door to know that it is possible to help your child to get more on a good sleep routine. And also, we can work together to sort it out if that's not happening, right? Having family, having togetherness, and making that more of a mandate. And so really, to answer your question, because of my value of feeling good, I've created systems and structures in my life to make sure that I'm getting good sleep at night, and that my household has a value on that. Like my youngest son, the routine is there. Even today, he's 10 now. And man, just within a few minutes, I can check in on him. That guy is sleeping. He's knocked out, right? But with him getting a little bit older, of course, there's going to be more things trying to draw him in, vying for his attention. Maybe it's the show, maybe his friends playing online, whatever the case might be. That we can create more wiggle room, but we've got to stay true to the principles.
And one of the beautiful things about that is that because that's built as a foundation for your family, like it's a family value, you also have the contrast. So when things get out of whack, you're like, whoa, like I know what good sleep is like. It's like growing up, some people who grew up in healthier households where they had like minimized amount of like processed junk and other things like that. And especially in their high school years, they didn't get sick as often.
Yeah.
Then you go to college and you pig out on all the same foods that other people are doing. You live through the college experience. And I had a friend this happened to, they would get sick regularly. And they're like, whoa, like what's going on now that is different in my life that when I was back in high school, living with my parents, eating home cooked meals and everything like that, I didn't get sick as often. So I think that contrast is important because kids will grow up one day and they'll go off and do other things. But now at least they have a baseline that they can return back to, which is a very powerful thing.
This is such a great example. My oldest son, Jordan, is 21. He just got back from Mexico. His first time traveling with his friend, right? So he gets back and first thing that he does, day one, is he's like drinking these greens drinks. He's fasting and all these things because of course he was going ham out there with the food that he was eating and whatever else going down in Cabo. But another thing that he mentioned was that the first day when he got up to go to the gym, because he's a personal trainer, right? So he's out there being of service and helping folks too. He got up and he went to see a client and he was like, man, it just kind of freaked me out that it was so bright outside. This dude has been every waking moment during the daytime in Mexico. He had his glasses on. He had his cool sunglasses. You know, he's Mr. You know, no disrespect. He was the cool guy down at Cabo, right? So every picture during the day, he's got these glasses on, these sunglasses. So literally his brain, like he wasn't getting sun exposure. And so now just a natural sun exposure during the day, sunlight was just like, he's like a vampire all of a sudden, just in like 5 days, right?
Wow.
And so, but that, and also because he knows what it's like to feel good, he felt it coming on down there as well. His friend was just like, nah, bro, I'm just not gonna, because my son offered to go to the gym and his friend, you know, they're feeling hungover. And so my son was like, nah, just go to the gym, do something. So he went to the gym, got himself a smoothie down there apparently. And he's just like, man, I felt like a new person, right? But his friend was dragging, that whole day was just a wash for him, you know? And so he knows these things because of our culture of what it's like to not feel good when you have these inputs. Not to say that you won't do the input, but you know where that baseline is and you have real world strategies to get back to the way that you want to feel.
The people that are healthy, they're getting healthier, right? People often ask me like, are people getting healthier or are they getting worse off? And it's actually both.
Yep.
The healthiest people, the people that are tuning in here, they're actually getting super healthy and they're becoming more aware and they're getting fitter and they're doing things, right? You see a lot of the people that write you and many of my friends listen to your podcast. I see it within their own families. They're getting healthier. And the folks that are working 2-3 jobs, might only have one parent in the household, they're trending in this other direction. I think I read some statistics the other day that like 5% of patients, and often these are patients that are in like dealing with like dialysis and other sort of extreme things. In many health systems, they can amount to almost 70-80% of the total cost of healthcare is taking care of 5% of patients that are there, right? These are the people that are just very sick and very unhealthy, often from chronic disease. So you have one side that's going in one way and you have another side that's going in another way. And for the side that's going in the wrong direction, at least from health outcome wise, is the advice that we're sharing on the podcast, walking more, making food at home. Is that enough? Or do we need a major intervention? And one of the major interventions that's having a lot of topics and discussions these days, you even hinted towards it earlier when it comes to obesity, is these GLP-1 inhibitors, right? We've had multiple clinicians come on this podcast talking about, and I want to ask them because I see a lot of people here. We live in LA. You see people are taking Ozempic, Wegovy, whatever, you know, the drugs that are out there. And I've heard a lot of nuanced thoughts about it, right? I've heard a lot of nuanced thoughts from people who come on, clinicians that say, hey, you know what? This is kicking people in the right direction, but there's a right way and a wrong way to do it, you know? And other people saying that, what is really the long-term impact of these? And is there really ever a free lunch with things? Do you have a perspective in the midst, especially in the context of your nutritional background, but then also your ability to empathize with the most disenfranchised societies, because you shared earlier that you have actually lived in a part of town that's like that, right? So what do we need on a national level? And is there a role for these pharmaceutical interventions, or are they taking us off track? Yeah. It's a lot there.
Of course. Well, you already know I tend to bring a balanced perspective because I'm not afraid to look at the things that I disagree with and see their value. I even mentioned honey buns having a value. Again,
Fruity Pebbles.
Ideally in the context of a zombie apocalypse, but on a daily basis, would that be something to eat if you're trying to perform at a high level and have good metabolic health? Probably not. And the same thing really holds true with this pharmaceutical model. But the problem is that we now exist in a pharmaceutical model of health. It's the domineering force that's dictating how people are being cared for. And this is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. There's so much money being made from the farming of sick people and not getting them well, not helping them to remove the cause. None of these things are bringing a quote cure. These are oftentimes creating lifetime customers of a thing. And again, not seeing the health outcomes that we are promised. There was a recent analysis that was done, huge meta-analysis, looking at the health outcomes from statins. All right. And statins, there was a time when it was near number one as far as drug classes that were getting prescribed. Multi-billion dollar drug class. It still is. But there was a time when it was something is chipping away at the statin industry right now. And some of the science is getting out. They were looking at actual increase or potential decrease. The scientists were just looking at the data on lifespan when having access to a statin or being prescribed a statin. And the researchers found this vast difference in what was believed. Essentially, we were seeing minus 15 days of life and upwards of maybe 30 days when being on a statin for years at a time. All right. So we're not really seeing an increase in lifespan. And the question is, well, what about quality of life? You mentioned a certain group of people taking up a lot of the resources as far as healthcare. What we're really good at is keeping people alive, but not necessarily living. It's not that we're necessarily living longer, we're dying longer. We can kind of extend the suffering and keep people around, but what about quality of life? Well, being on a statin, another one of these studies, I did a huge masterclass on this on my show. And there's several studies on this, by the way. We see about a 30% increased incidence of developing diabetes for people who take statins. It's creating this isn't a side effect, it's just other effects, all right? It might be effects that you don't want to happen, but we call them side effects. But it's an effect of taking this particular drug class that's going to not just alter how your body's processing cholesterol, but what is cholesterol responsible for? What it's interacting with? What's the effect it's going to have on a pancreas or the liver health or your brain? Because that's another thing there's even noted warnings on products about potential memory loss when taking a statin. The FDA after years will come out and add a label. In the context of Ozempic, Wegovy, and the like, there's a black box warning by the FDA on Ozempic, warning that, hey, this was in laboratory animals, but we do see a significant incidence of developing thyroid tumors. Just letting you know. It also says it's unsure that this would happen in humans. That unsure should make you unsure.
Can I ask you one question on that? Finish your point, and then okay. I'll jump in.
But this brings into the question, would somebody losing 100 pounds and all the metabolic benefit that can bring and reducing other risk factors, would that cost with an increased potential of developing cancer? Could somebody justify taking Ozempic? And I believe that there are cases when, yes, absolutely. And are we actually addressing the root cause of the obesity in the first place? Because you said it earlier, something along the lines of there's no free lunch. Every action has a reaction. We live in a universe where there's causality. There's cause and effect. It's a principle in physics. Stuff isn't just going to happen. You don't get this weight loss without every cell in your body is being influenced. It isn't just targeting GLP-1, because that's communicating with every single cell in your body is being affected. And what are the long-term outcomes? That's the last part I'm going to share here in this, and I'll pass it back to you. We don't have long-term data on this, but we do know that this is one of those things where it is being advocated to be on for extended amount of time, potentially forever, if you want to maintain these benefits. And in that black box warning, it says treatment duration, dependent tumors, and the amount. So how much you're taking and how long you're taking, every one of those steps increases your risk, potentially, of developing thyroid cancer. In animals, we're not animals though. All right. So again, I would just encourage a higher degree of skepticism, but also being open to this being a potential, not solution, but supplement to cracking the code of severe obesity in our society. But the other problem is that this isn't often used for people that are struggling with severe obesity. This is more so, in some instances, vanity metrics, and also not directing people and supporting them in what is the thing that's really going to help their bodies long term to sustain these results.
Yeah, that's well said. The question I was going to ask you is that we know, at least correlation wise, one of the biggest things that's correlated with cancer is obesity. And so obviously there's going to be risk, but in the case of severe obese people, we know the data. We've had an obese population now for decades. What is it now in America? It's like 63% or something like that.
So overweight and obese, it's nearing 80%. It's about 75% of our population. And clinically obese, the last published robust numbers were prior to the pandemic, and that was at 42.5%.
Got it.
And it was projected to hit 50% by 2030. But we've seen obesity take a nice jump
during the pandemic.
Yeah. So
yeah. So we know the long-term outcomes of people being severely obese. And you bring up a great point, which is that, again, are these things, especially on a public health level, when you have members of, top public health going on 60 Minutes and saying obesity is genetic, right? And we need to get kids started on these things. That's obviously when it gets really scary, when there's no other nutritional backing or emphasis. In fact, there'd be a lot more credibility because essentially, from my understanding, these GLP-1 inhibitors, they're peptides, right? They're peptides inside of the body. And so they are pharmaceuticals, right? But I think there's been a little bit more openness to even people in the health world about the potential role that peptides can play. Potential. But you get really nervous when people say, okay, we just need to get young people started on this. And then it's just that's it forever. And then you can eat whatever else you want to eat. So then what ends up happening, right? And obviously these are all different buckets, right? There's going to be people that do things for vanity, right? We've had people like some of our colleagues, JJ Virgin, Dr. Gabrielle Lyons, say look, I have patients where, they're 20 pounds overweight, they're 30 pounds overweight, but I'm going to make sure that they don't forget about the basics: strength training, eating correctly, doing some auditing of your calories, because even in the wellness world now, we can overeat on calories because there's so much healthy junk food that's out there today. Yeah. And at least let me teach them how to do it right. And then the other side of it, people like Robert Lustig, Callie Means, who are very, very worried about, there's no emphasis on nutrition. There's no emphasis on paying attention to the basics and the fundamental of health. There's no emphasis on working out. And this is going to be a hijacking of the pharmaceutical industry to just say, this is how it's going to be for the rest of our lives. And this becomes a new normal.
Chances are, again, we have to be honest also about the industry itself. There are all these documentaries and docuseries out there now. Painkillers is the latest one on Netflix about the opioid epidemic. And so, but the thing is just we might see that as an isolated incident, but that was just when it was getting started. Because many of the most robust, successful pharmaceutical companies today, the Slackler family might be, out of the business. But Johnson & Johnson was one of the biggest players in our recent opioid epidemic. They were really a primary source of opium, of this kind of, quote, genetically modified poppy that was being used to make a lot of these opioid drugs. And they just recently paid out part of a multi-billion-dollar settlement for their participation in this. And not to mention fentanyl came later, all right? And fentanyl is the leading killer, well, overdose overall, but fentanyl is the biggest one, of people in their, quote, prime of life years, all right? Literally, it's killing more people in our country than anything else, are things that have come from this pharmaceutical industry that knew the dangers, all right? So again, suddenly, this industry, they're bringing about something to help everybody who's struggling with their weight. The good folks at fill in the blank. No. We got to be honest here about the industry itself. Not to say that something good can't come from it, but we need to acknowledge the track record. Now, with that being said, listen, this is probably going to end badly. Just looking at history. I don't want it to, but one of the things that's happening right now, you mentioned that 60-minute segment. In other nationally televised shows, one of the things that just recently is going on is all the lawsuits that are coming out for the makers of Ozempic, in particular, causing, and one of the kind of leading stories with one of the biggest lawsuits was a woman who lost 150 pounds.
Wow.
Which is remarkable. But now she has severe digestive paralysis. She can't digest her food. She's suffering. Can you imagine putting something in your body and it doesn't move?
Wow.
And so all these lawsuits are coming forward due to digestive diseases and disruption taking place. Sepsis, so many bad things can happen if your digestion, part of it was like to slow down the movement of food through your system so you feel fuller longer. Is that something to really tinker with or tamper with based on how we evolved and just the natural, you've got to look at what are the long-term ramifications. This isn't just some little cute thing, like we just tweak this little thing in the system. But also, with that being said, we still have to be mindful of the place. We have to acknowledge how valuable it is in feeling good from potential problems, but also from people losing the weight that they've been struggling with, sometimes for decades. We have to acknowledge that matters too. If you feel good and feel good about yourself, what kind of health benefits can that do? So we got to keep all this stuff in context. But I would just, again, come into this very, very skeptical because everything has a price to it. And if we're not addressing the root cause, and that's really what our society has been terrible at. So going back to that specific point, this is one of the most important parts of this conversation. There are two tracks. There are two trains right now. It's two bullet trains. Sans Brad Pitt. All right, we've got two bullet trains. One is people are getting healthier than ever. We're talking about extending lifespan substantially and quality of life, not just lifespan, but health span. And then we've got multiple epidemics of chronic disease, the likes of have never been seen in human history. We are the most chronically diseased society in the history of humanity. And the question is, where's the bridge for people because this is another thing people don't understand. I've never met one person who didn't want to be healthy. Never.
Everyone wants it.
Everybody wants it. But we might have stories about what it costs and things that we tell ourselves, even sometimes not even feeling worthy of being healthy. And so we tell ourselves, we can tell ourselves and tell other people we don't care. But that's not true. Everybody wants to be healthy. It's just a matter, again, the conditions that we're existing in. And what this really has to do with is these kind of battles of culture. We can get into our little bubbles of health and think that everything is a lot better than it is. But most of our citizens and our families are struggling, and it's getting worse. So how do we change this? Because for me, for years, I was trying to target social behavior change, target the macro culture. And you can make some changes. My first book, Sleep Smarter, it's an international bestseller. It's getting close to 30 different languages it's translated in, and it shifted the culture. It made the conversation of sleep wellness something that was popular. Many books have come since, but it was a trigger. It was it was the first domino for something really big and really special. So I know my power in that. And that's still not the fastest way to get to that tipping point. I'm actually rereading Malcolm Gladwell's book, Tipping Point, right now. And he did this really cool shout out for me for my show not too long ago. And he's just one of those people that it's just a great thinker. And this is how epidemics are started. There's a tipping point. And we tend to frame epidemics as things that are negative, but we can also have epidemics of wellness. We can have a culture where it's normal to be healthy. Right now, it's normal to be unhealthy, right? And so if you're a healthy person who doesn't have a metabolic disease in this culture today, you're weird. You're not normal. And we want to embrace the weirdness, yes. But at the same time, how do we create that tipping point where we normalize wellness, where we make it easy for people to make healthy choices, where we make it easy for people to access ways to express their bodies and to move their bodies and to access healthy food? It doesn't start by targeting the macro culture, which is what a lot of people think who don't come from where I come from, which is like, we need access. We need more access to healthcare. We're getting access to a system that is keeping us sick and disempowered. All right. We need more. People don't have access to healthy food. That's what the problem is. There was still healthy food in my environment. I just didn't know that it existed.
Right.
I didn't know the difference. You know, living in Ferguson, Missouri, coming out of my apartment complex, the first thing I see is a liquor store with shelves and shelves of ultra processed food. That's just one of the liquor stores I'm surrounded by. Not to mention, which shouldn't be legal with different zoning laws. It's not allowed in many other parts of the country, like, quote, nice neighborhoods. But every fast food you can name within a 2-mile radius, I'm surrounded by it. All of it. All of it. So that's what I see, and it's cheap. And so the culture is programming me like, this is food. This is what you eat. I don't realize that that's not even food. It's fake food. And so how do we change this? We change this by shifting the microculture first. And so what do I mean by this? The macro culture is the culture that we exist in. Our culture, just to define what culture is, a culture is the attitudes, values, beliefs, and behaviors of a group of people that is then passed on from one generation to the next. That's what culture is. That's what it's defined as. We have no choice but to be affected by the culture that we grow up in. We say this, we're a product of our environment. Absolutely, we are. But what's different about us as humans, we're also creators of our environment. We can consciously make alterations in our environment that alter our outcomes. And so the microculture is a culture in your household. But also, your culture is something you carry with you. When we just went to Hawaii recently, I realized, like, I'm planted now into this other culture, but my culture, people were literally coming up to me and my family multiple times there. They were just attracted to us for some reason. And I know what it is now. I thought on the surface, like, okay, maybe it's like the kind of healthy exuberance, maybe, right? My son's out here with all these muscles, whatever. Like, what do you do? What do you guys do? What is your workout? That kind of stuff. But it's because of our connection. That's what was attractive, and I this true story, just even when we got on the plane, twice on that trip, people walked by us and said, your family's so beautiful, right? One lady who was probably in her 60s or 70s, she was like, can you guys adopt me? All right. These are true. This has really happened. And in the moment, I don't think about it. I'm like, just, oh, that's so sweet. But then I'm just like, after, having these conversations, I'm just like, why? What would trigger somebody to acknowledge us like that? And so I realized that you take your culture with you wherever you go. You influence the world around you. And we don't really get it. All right. So, for example, I can now, because of the culture that is built within me, I can go into what you would deem to be the most unhealthy circumstances and still make choices that are advantageous to me and what I'm about and what I believe in. Many people, myself included, there was a time when we go into a certain environment and we might tell ourselves, I'm not eating that or I'm not drinking with these people. But you get into the environment and other things happen. The environment dictates. And so it's creating the culture within yourself and your family. And so that microculture is the most powerful, effective force because my family, not just me, there's an energy that gets created when there's more people involved, is such a powerful model or influence to other families, right? And so when they see us, they see what's possible. But I had to consciously create that culture in my household. A lot of things were unconscious, though, let me be clear. But eventually got to a place where I'm making choices. And here's the rub. No one said this was going to be easy. No one said this was going to be easy. But you got to choose your hard. You've got to choose. It's hard having your children have chronic diseases. I had asthma, my little brother, chronic asthma. Of course, arthritic condition, by the way, in high school. My little sister had severe eczema. My mother, obese, diabetes, stepfather, addiction, eventual obesity. This is all we knew was disease, right? That's hard. That's hard. Oh, but we got to eat all kinds of stuff, right? We were eating, I mean, I get the food. This was back when food stamps came in a little booklet. So you had paper, little pieces. My mom would give me like a $10 food stamp. I go to the corner store. It's on. All right. I'm getting all kinds of, old Vienna hot chips and not orange juice, orange drink was one of my favorite things, right? Because just being in the hood, growing up where I grew up, and also, penny candy. Literally 1 penny gets you a piece of candy. You come in with $1? We literally, all of us are walking around the hood with a paper bag full of starts off with 100 pieces of candy. And it's just getting ran through by the end of the day. All right. It's crazy. And so that's hard as well. Okay. So we feel that we get to do whatever we want, eat whatever we want, but we're also all struggling with diseases and struggling with our connection with each other and struggling with an ability to make it out of this volatile environment. Because that's what the data shows. There's already clear data on this. When we venture into obesity, being in a low-income environment, it is substantially harder to reach a place of financial security. Because it's not that we can't. It's not that it's impossible. It's just harder because we have to have the energy to be able to do different things. And so we get to choose our hard. The other hard is we start to proactively find ways to bring more healthy assets or exposures into our family environment, knowing that there might be some resistance. If, for example, we've got kids who we've spent years putting a device in front of them and they would eat while, watching a show or playing video games, and we don't eat together often at all, if or at all, it's going to take a shift in the culture. But what I did was I dug into the science, absolutely. And just also being very practical. Like, what are some of the things that you can do to help to make that transition more smooth? Because the solution at its core is connecting. This is with adults and children. We're just a big adult babies, really, to be honest. We still have a lot of the same wiring. We don't think that we're affected by peer pressure, for example. We tell our kids, don't be subject to peer pressure. We do the same thing now. We're probably more subject to peer pressure when we get older. But being able to understand the psychology of our loved ones, what motivates them, what de-excites them, it's all got to be driven by creating something. We can't just take something away that people enjoy. We have to replace it with something of equal or greater value. That's the key. That's the key. So if I'm coming in saying, okay, I know that you love Denny's pancakes. You're a Denny's boy. Every week you're at Denny's. Moon's over my hammy, all the things, but you got to get your pancakes. We can't just take the pancakes away. Yes, you said this earlier. You can have the pancakes and we add in these other things. And or we can even make some delicious pancakes that rival your Denny's pancakes over here. But now we're adding in all these real food elements. And, our friend Mark Hyman says that food isn't just food, it's information. What if we can slide in some of these protein sweet potato pancakes and all of that new information into your body that starts to alter those kind of epigenetic influencers. We have nutrigenomics, nutrigenetics, and now your brain starts working differently. Now your metabolism starts working differently. You just ate a pancake though. That's all you might be even concerned about. I'm eating a delicious pancake, right? And so that was the part of the mission as well. Let's talk about some tactics for the family to create this environment around the table, also the kitchen culture, to get people more into a place of celebration and joy versus pulling everybody along. And also the food, because that's at the end of the day, what am I going to eat? And so even those pancakes that I mentioned, that's one of the most popular recipes that's in the book, these protein sweet potato pancakes. Do you have a photo
in the book?
Of course, yeah. Let's pull it up.
Tessa, let's see if we can find it. While she's pulling that up, shout out to Tessa. Thanks for pulling that up. you were making this connection between a lot of people want to start on the macro. They want to focus on access. They want to do that, but it's really the micro. So as part of that is like, hey, take care of you and your family home environment first.
Yes.
You have no idea that once you get right, how you can influence everybody around you. But if you go too quickly to try to influence other people without having your own culture right, your own family unit right, and even if you're single, that's your own personal culture that's there, you're going to end up spinning your wheels because people are going to look at you and going to say, well, if it's that easy, you're not doing it in your own home. Right?
Part, yeah.
So when you get it there, and we have literally seen that, even though the statistics are crazy right now, and we've mentioned them all before, how we're headed more to chronic disease, how we're headed more to obesity. I will say one thing, for the people that are truly the leaders of culture, the thought leaders that are there in pretty much every category, music, intellectuals like Malcolm Gladwell, right? And authors, obviously in this space of personal development, health, fitness people. I have never across the board seen so many people talking about health, true wellness is their driving priority in life. And that is exciting.
Yeah.
I've also, even though we have a lot of work to do, I've never seen more people talking in my life that I've been here for 40 years or so and living in America for probably about 37 of those years. I've never seen on a political side, even though I'm not waiting for some politician to solve the issue, right? You talked about our friend Mark Hyman. He says, revolutions don't start in Congress. They can end in it, but it's the people that get it started. So this revolution of health, I am quite hopeful because I've never seen so many people talking about how health is truly their main driving value in life. Are you noticing this too?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not, again, we can get into these bubbles, but I'm seeing this across the board and people in different, levels of entrepreneurship, for example. And also I can see the requests that I get coming in from all these different, corporate entities asking me to come and speak to their teams. I just did a talk for ESPN. Yeah. Shout out to all the people at ESPN at the Falcons football stadium in Atlanta, which was crazy. I'm speaking at this. My green room was like the visiting coach's locker room. Like, it's just these kind of crazy experiences. But what they wanted to do was not just looking at execution at a high level in their job performance, but being corporate wellness warriors or corporate athletes, right? That's the new framing that's getting put into a lot of these different entities, because not only does it really help with the bottom line, which for a lot of companies is the bottom line, all the sick days, all the expenses in dealing with folks that are struggling with their health, which it can be a weight on a business, but improving that, but also seeing these other really remarkable side effects that don't get quantified enough, which is employee morale and connection, right? Relationships and creativity, right? Because we're living at a time really of the extreme need for innovation and creativity. That's really our superpower right now in the information age. And especially AI is like, it's just knocking on the door. What is going to be your linchpin, right? How are you going to make yourself a linchpin in whatever it is that you're trying to do? What's going to set you apart? We need the energy and capacity to be able to do that. And so much of our energy is siphoned. Even, you mentioned earlier the significant increase in cancer, for example, when we venture into obesity. One of those cancers, we see about a doubling in risk of ovarian cancer, testicular cancer when we venture into obesity. But endometrial cancer in particular is about a 7 to 10 times increase incidence when we venture into obesity.
Crazy.
And so it's just like, what can we do to help to something that might seem on the surface about, vanity and body positivity and self-love, but also helping to reduce the risk of things that are really destroying families and taking people out. We have a pharmaceutical model that we're existing in right now, but there's a lot of dents getting hit into it. A lot of holes are getting poked into it right now. There are minor shifts. Even the fact that there are all these documentaries out kind of calling out this behavior, it's like art imitating life, life imitating art kind of thing. But also like these messages are getting out there and people are thinking different, right? And I believe that nature finds a way. We're at this place where we're talking about the destruction of our species. Casey Means has talked about this as well. But and I don't even like to talk about this because it's so dark, but we're seeing a significant drop in the ability for humans to reproduce. In about a 50-year time span, there's about a 50% reduction in sperm in the average male's semen, about a 50% reduction in full term. Matter of fact, a 50% increase in miscarriages as well in the same time span. And I can go on and on and on. And the question is like, what is it? Why is this happening with humanity? It's not just one thing. Everything affects our ability to reproduce. Even going back to what we're making our cells out of, those sex cells, even our womb, if we're talking about our mothers out there, is made from the food that person has eaten. And a recent study was just published in the FASB journal, and they found that there's an appetite regulating network in the brain that's well established. This is a part of the hypothalamus, but mothers who are exposed to excessive amounts of food, in particular is going to be coming through ultra processed food, created what they deem to be permanent changes to the appetite regulating network in their children. And in particular, they noted significant leptin resistance in the brain as well. So the inability to feel satisfied from the foods that we're eating. And so literally, even in the womb, we're making these changes. And so we've got to understand the power of food, absolutely, that we're making our tissues out of these things, and we get to choose what we're making ourselves out of. But it's not just food. It's also that movement. It's also our relationships is it might be the biggest thing according to, again, the longest running human study. Not to mention that huge meta-analysis I mentioned earlier. Our relationships play such a powerful role. If you're going to, part of your exercise has been your men's group that you get together and you guys go hiking or whatever the case might be, like doing things under the spirit of like, if you have that social connection and accountability, it just makes all that stuff easier.
It's the positive peer pressure.
Yeah.
Right? That you mentioned earlier. It makes a difference in our life and it helps us spiral upwards instead of spiraling downwards.
Yeah.
Let's talk about food and recipes. We brought up the recipe. This looks beautiful for those that are just listening on audio. This is a gorgeous pancake recipe. What's the name of this?
This is sweet potato protein pancakes.
Talk about a big picture. Like, what is there a story behind this? Is it literally like one of your sons? Like, how did this recipe come to be and get included in the cookbook?
Awesome. So, number one, what I did was, you see those little emojis right there?
Yes.
The little brain emoji.
Walk us through. So those watching on YouTube, you could see it. And, but yes, there's a brain emoji, a muscle. There's a brain with a lightning, sort of like brain power,
yeah,
right?
Cognitive function. And
then there's digestive.
And yeah, exactly. And so we've got the cognitive function with the brain emoji. We've got the muscle emoji is like metabolic health. And then the one with the kind of lightning bolt through the human mind is our state of mental wellness, so mental health aspects. And so what I did was I targeted some of the most nutrient dense, science-backed foods, and whatever particular part of the body that had the most data that they kind of target, helping to improve the function of, I created a correlating emoji because we have an emoji culture. Sometimes like a couple emojis says more than a paragraph, And so I wanted to leverage that. And so with those foods, one of them was sweet potatoes, and there was some remarkable data on its influence on potentially even improving our state of mental wellness, because these really remarkable anthocyanins, well, let's just talk about that really quickly.
Yeah.
So the anthocyanins in sweet potatoes apparently can help to improve our memory. All right. So there's some data on that. And also it's providing this little serotonin hit that can help. Like serotonin is kind of glorified as this feel good neurotransmitter / hormone. A little sweet potato can actually increase your body's production of serotonin and also utilization of serotonin. So what I did was I was just like, okay, my family, we love brunch, brunch foods, pancakes is a big thing.
Literally my favorite meal of the day.
Yes. I mean, it's for a lot of people. And so I was just like, what can we do to bring in some real food nutrients, nutrition that also tastes delicious into a pancake recipe? And also the biggest kind of downside with a pancake is the fact that it's just this very carbohydrate dominant thing. And so bringing in a really high quality protein source, this could be a high quality, grass-fed whey or whatever the case might be, to up level the protein ratio in the meal as well. And so I worked, man, I made so many pancakes trying to figure this out, the recipe, because we're big foodies. Like my family, all of us are, like I mentioned, my stepfather's a chef, executive chef, actually at Morton's of Chicago for many years. And so we're just really big foodies. We all like to cook and make amazing food, but we also tell you if something doesn't taste good, so we're not shy about that. Because, for me, I've never really bought into this idea of eating to live and not living to eat.
Yeah. Because
humans, we, just like any animal in nature, have you ever thought about why certain animals eat certain things? Like, why are they driven to eat that thing? We are designed, we have a certain flavor palette that drives us to eat certain foods. We just evolved that way. And if we were living in natural, normal circumstances, there's something called post-ingestive feedback. And we talked about this before, but we would eat a food and our cells would basically take notes that, okay, I just ate these cherries and I got, this vitamin C, I got this melatonin. Wow, there's melatonin in this food, right? I got this selenium, right? It's just like taking notes. And so if we become deficient in those things or start to run low, our stock and our cells, it would create a craving to go and seek out that flavor, all right, that cherry flavor. And so that's called post-ingestive feedback. The problem is today, food scientists have really manipulated those pathways. And now it's like the waters are so muddied because we could take that cherry flavor and isolate it using a gas chromatograph and be able to identify the chemistry that makes that cherry flavor. And now we can add that flavor to candy. We can add that flavor to popsicles, and the list goes on and on. No cherries required. Right. And so what we're doing with this is taking back control of our palate, of our biology, and starting to retrain our palate with real food. And so that flavor intelligence starts to come back online, and we start to ironically crave healthy things. That's the crazy thing that is possible because we know it. And some people have experienced this with exercise. Like they don't feel right if they don't exercise. Like they crave it. Something hard? What? This is what's possible. And you get to choose your hard, but we can create basically a positive addiction, essentially. But also an addiction where you don't overdo it because that appetite regulating network gets proper inputs.
You feel fulfilled and complete, but you're still drawn to these things.
Yeah.
And literally like the cells in your body are changing.
Yeah.
And they start to be attracted to more of those healthier components. I felt this for so much of my life where once I started shifting how I ate, you literally crave healthy food. And again, a big part of that is that people don't know always what to make. Like, what do we eat? What do we make? When you learn a few things, when you have some guidance from a cookbook like yours that's out now, it shows you that really you only need to make like 4 to 6 meals. And then you have your variations of them, right? Most of us are not making something new every single night. And definitely not moms who are often leading a lot of the cooking inside of the household, right? You have your family staples, the recipes that you enjoy, that everybody loves, some things that you might make on a special occasion, and the variation that happens inside of it. I've found that just learning, 3 to 4 to 5 recipes for somebody and picking your favorites from a book like this is enough for people to completely shift how they eat.
Yeah. And it goes back also to simplicity with that too. Because a lot of my friends and colleagues have put out recipe books before, and I'm definitely, a red flag goes up if there's too many ingredients.
Yeah.
And so really making this very simple where most of the recipes have 10 ingredients or less, somewhere around that. And also getting those flavor sensations and food experiences that we love so much. One of my favorite food experiences as a kid was when the bomb pop man would drive down the street. Now, I don't know if you know about this.
Bomb pop, like is that like a popsicle?
So yeah. So
Okay.
it's an ice cream truck, right? And so it's got like music or the bells.
Yeah.
No matter what we're doing, we hear it. It's like the Avengers call or something, like Avengers Assemble. We're all running outside to stop the bomb pop man. He pulls up and they've got the pictures of all the different types of ice cream and popsicles on the side. And, sometimes basically you need $1, sometimes the cheapest bomb pops were like 25 cents. And wow, like what an experience on a hot summer day for a bunch of kids in the hood, And so, but knowing that experience of having a really delicious popsicle, for example, it's just like, oh no, I have to honor that. And so we created these cherry frozen yogurt pops. And these are all really simple things to do, and also simple things and fun things to do with your kids. But even with that, there are different like little trays and things you can make bomb pops and popsicles in the freezer. But what are those made of as well? Because we don't want to possibly, especially all the data is coming out with certain plastics, which is one of the kind of go-tos. And so we use a silicone model for that, or mold. And there's so many cool things. So that's another big thing that we talk about in the book is like good, better, best options for doing some of these things. You mentioned even even something along the lines of the food preparation and what that energy that it can require. So there's strategies on, making food for leftovers. There's strategies on, it's another thing that Mark really sparked in my mind to dig into the research on. How much food waste we have is crazy. We have enough food that we waste that we could feed everybody on Earth 2-3 times over.
It's like 40% of our food goes to waste.
Exactly. So what are some strategies that we can actually keep a hold on our food? And so another one of those foods, by the way, and I'll just share this study really quickly, is avocados. Avocados are definitely having its moment right now. It's even like there's even McDonald's got some avocado on their burger.
Really?
But
I've not seen that.
Yeah.
McDonald's is putting avocado on the burger?
Something. They're putting avocado on different stuff. Yes.
Okay.
All right. So this is a randomized controlled trial. This was cited in the journal Current Developments in Nutrition. And it found that adding avocado to test subjects' diet over the course of the 3-month study led to a significant reduction in belly fat.
Wow.
Again, all things considered calorie-wise, there's something really remarkable about metabolic health regarding avocados. Number one, there's a bridge there. Some people don't even like, I didn't even eat an avocado until I was about 25, my entire life, because it just looked weird. All right. Now it's one of my favorite foods. But with that, an avocado can be a risky purchase. Also, if you don't have a lot of money, I can get 2 for 99-cent tacos at Jack in the Box, because of government subsidies, by the way, enable that. And an avocado might cost you $3. All right. So we want to make it count. And avocados can go from good to like disrespectful very quickly, right? It's like unripe and then like can get disrespectful. So how do you really extend the lifespan of that avocado, right? So because I tend to buy multiple, and before I know it, I can end up possibly losing all of these. And it happened too many times where I just look into a little bit of the science. And so right before it gets to that perfect ripeness, or even when it's ripe, put it in the refrigerator. That can extend the viability of it for another 3 days. All right. Just right there off the bat. Another thing is once it's ripe and you're not going to use it right now, you can cut it into chunks and put it in the freezer to use to make smoothies. You're welcome. You're welcome. And we have a great smoothie recipe in the book. One of my favorite ones is the Heart Health smoothie. And so it has all of these really science-backed ingredients for improving your cardiovascular health. And cherries are one of the highlights as well. But that cherry and avocado combination with some chocolate, ooh, it's not only is it delicious, but it's really, really good for your metabolic health.
A little protein powder so you can hit your protein goals, and boom, you're done. How do you, one of the biggest questions that people have is often that start of the day. How do I start the day that not only that I'm leaning towards whole foods, and different people want to eat at different times, right? But that I'm also getting in that protein. Going back to that study that you shared, that Ward study where people were starting with eggs in the morning. And it wasn't necessarily something special about eggs alone, even though eggs are very special. It was the fact that they're having, some protein, a little bit of healthy fat inside of there. that seems to play a role, as we were chatting about, being satiated and feeling full, and also having that protein to sustain you and, hit some of your goals, especially if you're working out. What are some ways that you start your morning off that play on some of those themes? Because again, I see so many people confused about what they should be eating in the morning.
Yeah. So again, just looking at the science on this, and this isn't true for everybody, by the way. Some people can do well on a higher carbohydrate based intake for their first thing. Some people. But for most folks, you're going to want to keep the carbs a little bit lower, not saying necessarily low carb, but ensure that you're getting in that, really substantial whack of protein and some healthy fats. It's really going to help to improve satiety throughout the day. What the data indicates is that eating a higher ratio of carbohydrates for that first meal in the morning keeps your appetite higher throughout the rest of the day. And I know that I've experienced this firsthand as well. But what are the things that are most promoted to us for breakfast in our culture? These are all carbohydrate dominant things outside of things like eggs, for example. For most folks, and I know for me, the thing that I was eating when I would get to school, I was in a school free lunch program. They're giving the kids these single serving bowls of cereal, Frosted Flakes and Fruit Loops and things like that. And then a little cup of like orange juice, maybe the milk to pour on your cereal. It's just like, or donuts, this is so nefarious in a sense, what we're feeding our kids to start the day. But this is what we're marketed to. They're called breakfast cereals for a reason. Although, for me, it didn't matter what time, especially I was a cereal guy, a cereal killer. All right. So definitely, I've eaten many bowls of cereal late in the evening. But like one of those big serving dishes as well. Like I take this cereal seriously, but they're so addictive. It's a very addictive thing. This is why I have such a strong memory, like flavor, like my brain, I know what that tastes like, those Fruity Pebbles. And, just even understanding that part of it, what our kids are getting, one of the industry tenets is get them while they're young. You can create a lifetime customer that way. I know that was the case for me and many other people. Like we have these food experiences as a child that we carry with us into adulthood. We just tend to never break them for many of us in our culture today, unfortunately. And so for me, I'm going to celebrate that. Funny enough, I'm going to celebrate that. And I'm going to find a way, how can we do this with real food? Right? And we got to stop. The pivot, unfortunately, recently has been lesser of evils, right? Even in a political context, who's the least bad? Like what if we have choose from the greater of goods? What if we do that? And so doing that with food. And so one of those would be, let's be honest about in the health space, our recent obsession with quote, low glycemic sweeteners. All right. Where we get this bag of xylitol or stevia, whatever. It looks like sugar. It looks the same. It's a bag of that white powder. Okay. You can get this on the streets as well. Like it looks suspicious, but they're telling you, okay, let's bake all these different recipes. Use this instead. That is by its very nature and deeply ultra processed food. And so what I'm bringing forward is like, hey, wait a minute. What if there was a sweetener that is far beyond a sweetener? And what if there's a sweetener that our genes have the closest resonance with, like we've been eating as a species longer than any of this stuff? And that sweetener is honey. This is a food that's been utilized for thousands of years. And there's a recent study that I cited in the book. Again, this is one of the foods that we go through. And they found that not only does honey not create that initial derangement, spike and crash in blood glucose upon consumption, over time, utilizing honey actually improved people's fasting glucose.
Wow.
That's crazy. How a sweetener? No. That's because it's disrespectful to even call honey just a sweetener. It's something different. And oh, by the way, in that study, they also found improvement in blood lipids and overall reduction in cardiovascular disease risk when test subjects were eating honey. Raw honey, just be clear. Not the pasteurized stuff that,
a lot of fake honey out there.
Oh man, yeah. There's a lot of fake Jessica Albas out there. All right. So some people are gonna get that.
Some people are not gonna get it.
There's a movie, it's a dance flick called Honey, Jessica Alba. Shout out to her. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's the enzymatic kind of it's so loaded with all of these different polyphenols and enzymes. This is why honey is so stable. Like they've literally dug up honey, in Egypt. That is like centuries old, that it's not necessarily like you want to eat it, but you can. Yeah. All right.
As long as it doesn't interact with water, honey is very stable. It's going to stick around forever.
Special. It's a special food. And so I'm being right now, very, very bullish on honey, just really advocating for like, let's give ourselves permission to enjoy some sweetness, but let's do it with the good stuff. Because humans, we've evolved to seek out tasty, sweet things. But we villainized our desire for sweet things. And also food manufacturers have manipulated it as well, absolutely. There's nothing wrong with liking something sweet. Through our evolution, we knew it's tied to this sweet flavor is a great source of energy that I can use to run processes, in particular for our brain that runs on glucose primarily. Regardless of a ketogenic protocol, which ketos, shout out to ketones, absolutely. But there are many processes that exclusively run on glucose. And this is why, and this is one of the interesting things, our brain is only about 2% of our body's mass, but it uses about 25% of the calories we eat. And researchers at Harvard found that in any given meal, your brain will gladly confiscate about 50% of the glucose that you just took in. All right, so if you just drank a Mountain Dew Code Red, about half of that sugar is going to be sopped up by your brain cells. Is it an accident that we're seeing this epidemic of insulin resistance in the brain, i.e. onset of degenerative brain diseases, i.e. Alzheimer's is now the 6th leading cause of death in the United States, aka type 3 diabetes? Your brain is just funneling that stuff up, right? So it's not our desire for sweet things that's the problem. It's how we've been manipulated recently in our culture. So let's create a cultural shift, honor our desires, use higher quality foods, and ultimately by us making these changes in our microculture. And I did this living in Ferguson, Missouri, with barely 2 nickels to rub together. I found a way to get this done and figure it out. There happened to be a farmer's market in Ferguson, the good part. By the way, I didn't live in a good part. It was just 10 minutes away. There's a farmer's market for years. I just wasn't attuned to it because I was telling myself that I don't have access. Nobody's going to help me. It was right there, and it ended up being one of those things. Eventually was integrated into my family culture where we would go to farmer's market every weekend. And my kids would, we get to talk to the farmers and we get some little treats there. But now I'm paying half the price I was paying at Whole Foods to get the same foods. And I'm closer to where it comes from, right? There is a way. There's absolutely a way. And the last part is, as soon as we start feeling better, the interesting thing that happens is, again, we activate this capacity for creativity. And we tend to find a way to be able to invest in ourselves and invest in our foods at a higher level, right? It's just taking one step at a time. When we feel better, we start to do better. That's really at the heart of all of this. Whether it's our interaction with our family, when we feel better, we start to do better. We're better able to manage, and our tolerance, our empathy and compassion goes up. It's not that we can't have it when we don't feel well. It's just harder, and it pulls away a lot of that mental energy. Literally, I'm talking about tangible glucose drainage from the brain. There's something called decision fatigue. But as we take better care of ourselves and build up that capacity, that microculture in ourselves, branch that out to our family, now we have a superpower in influencing our community. And that's really what this is all about.
Well said. When you feel good, you have all the energy you need to give love and attention to the goals that matter to you. Whatever that might be. Somebody wants to start a creative project. Somebody wants to have the energy to run around for their grandkids. Somebody wants to build a new business. Somebody wants to, whatever it is, whatever your goals are, you need energy. If you need sustained energy and not fake energy, that's really built on a house of whole foods.
Yeah.
And of course, not having a sedentary lifestyle, getting in your walking, and then especially a little bit of strength training inside the mix too. You combine those together with some friendships, turn off the media. You know, I don't know if you've interviewed her before, but Dr. Tara Swart, she's a neuroscientist, Oxford trained neuroscientist, and also psychiatrist. She's an MD neuroscientist, incredible human being. She said, when I talk to my friends and colleagues that are neuroscientists, I don't know one of them, this is from her, I don't know one of them that regularly watches the news because they know how susceptible our brain is to information. About, wow, an Oxford trained psychiatrist and neuroscientist telling people she doesn't know one neuroscientist in her network, right? Her network that regularly watches, traditional news because of knowing how susceptible our brain is to all this negativity that we're surrounded by. So key. 2 follow-up questions on what you shared. Breakfast idea, right? Just one. What's one thing you had for breakfast this week that was a great way to hit your protein goals, but have that sustained energy, just like we were talking about eggs? And then besides dessert recipes, is there a way that you incorporate honey in your routine in a week?
Absolutely, of course. So, of course, it's easy psychologically for us to see something, quote, sweet, right? So adding to a smoothie or the like, or a dessert. But also we can integrate this into, I've got a spicy protein bowl as well that's got, notes of things like, sriracha, things like that, but all these high quality protein foods. And then you add a little drizzle of honey. Oh, it gets serious, And also one of my favorite recipes is the honey sriracha salmon as well in the book. We have that, at least every couple of weeks we'll have that. It's one of our family favorites. And some of these things are very simple to make as well. And you can modulate, bring a little bit more honey or a little bit more sriracha for your sweetness and spicy desires. But those are just a couple. Yeah, there's tons of different ways that we can add in honey, even into kind of classically lower glycemic recipes. And also, not to mention, even with something with, a recipe with salmon, everybody knows this at this point, the value of these fatty fish. But I dig in. You know how I do it. I'm just like bringing it to another level, but also making it more tangible and practical. But one of the most recent studies found that folks in particular that aren't consuming enough DHA and EPA have the highest rate of brain shrinkage. And so they were using MRIs and looking at people's brains, and they found that under 4 grams a day, that was kind of like the minimum effective dose for protecting your brain from shrinking over time and losing mass, in particular your gray matter. Your gray matter matters, And so being able to protect our brain, how do we hit these marks? Depending on the type of salmon, by the way, there's a variety. And we're not even talking about farm versus wild caught, but, from coho to king salmon, potentially with one serving, you can hit that mark and beyond, just depending on which type of salmon you're eating. So it's just like, it's a really great food to get those compounds that are so important for sustaining our brain, right? But we can deliver that in a tasty way. We don't just got to buy a supplement, which again, I'm not against supplements at all, but it should be supplementing an already great nutrition protocol to fuel your human excellence, And so let's get this from food first and then add in supplements accordingly. But our cells have evolved to interact with food.
Hey YouTube, if you enjoyed what you just saw, keep watching for more great content on how to improve your brain and your life.
Craving and desire is the foundation of stress and fear. When we are afraid of something, we have one of 3 responses. We can either remain still, we can retreat, or we can move forward.